Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
A leading group of Brexit-supporting Conservative MPs have put forward proposals on the highly contentious issue of how the Irish border will be handled after Britain leaves the EU. The European Research Group's approach is an alternative to what's been laid out in the government's Chequers plan, and it comes amid renewed questions about the support the Prime Minister can command. It includes simplified customs procedures to avoid the need for checks at the border, similar UK and EU regulations for agricultural producers, and a so-called trusted trader scheme for larger companies to clear goods for import and export. Here's our political editor, Laura Koonsberg.
Plotting a way through, not, they say, plotting against Theresa May. Former cabinet ministers and the first ever First Minister of Northern Ireland say forget the political fuss about Brexit and the border. They claim there's a simpler way through.
I commend it to you for its common sense, its practicality, its effectiveness in dealing with all of the serious issues, whilst at the same time delivering on the promise of the British people to leave the single market, leave the customs union and therefore leave the European Union.
These are scratchy times though. That plea is designed to get the Prime Minister to ditch her Brexit plans altogether. And while this group will never say it, there have been talks about whether to try to force her out.
I have long said and repeated again and again that I think the policy needs to be changed, but I'm supporting the person.
Under what they call common sense, customs checks could be carried out miles away from the actual border. Those checks could be minimised by better use of technology and having similar rules to the EU in some areas.
What is it that makes you think as a group that either the UK government or the European Union would accept these proposals now when they have shown no sign of doing so far?
There is an iron focus in this paper on answering the EU's problem, not doing what we've done before and saying how we would like to do it. We're saying this is the problem you have outlined as the EU, and this is how it can be solved from your point of view.
And how far are you prepared to push the Prime Minister if she will not budge and adopt your ideas?
We're arguing this on logic, facts and the needs of the European Union to protect their own market. That's why they should listen to it. That's why the Prime Minister should listen.
Those gathered here reckon she might have to listen because there are enough of them to defeat her in the Commons, even if they're coy about that right now.
I think if you were saying what happens if Chequers is dead, I think Chequers is dead because the EU have already rejected it.
The talks have got stuck, it's obvious, and we are beginning to get very close where we completely run out of time.
And pressure for this border plan comes from one side of Northern Ireland too. Remember, the Prime Minister relies on support from a clutch of unionist MPs. And their leader in Westminster today backed the Brexiteers' idea.
So it is wrong to say that you can't have any particular outcome because of the Irish border problem. That is wrong, it's been proved to be wrong, and the paper today helps to set that out more clearly.
But while she's under attack right now for choosing a path that would keep us tucked alongside the EU, Theresa May is not budging.
When we leave the European Union, we will be an independent sovereign state. We will have control of our money, our borders and our laws.
And Labour says Tory division puts Ireland's stability at risk.
I detect rising anxiety about the state of the negotiations. My message, I suppose, is this, that Ireland cannot pay the price of Theresa May's failed negotiating strategy.
If that wasn't enough, a reminder from Europe, there's little chance the government's overall proposals will be accepted as they are.
That someone who leaves the Union cannot be in the same privileged position as a member state. If you leave the Union, you are, of course, no longer part of our single market, and certainly not only in parts of it.
But in number 10, there's one big plan. Keep calm and carry on. Why there seems to be so much problem about all of this. And these proposals today, well, they sound rather sensible. Well, for the British government, the Irish government and the European Union, the problem is this. There are too many ifs and maybes in the plan. The technology doesn't exist yet. There's no way it could be ready as soon as we leave the European Union. And remember, the issue of the Irish border is the hardest conundrum to solve in all of the Brexit negotiations. And there's a big battle over the practicalities of fixing this and finding a solution. But it is also, Michelle, a proxy for whose vision of Brexit wins out.
Laura Koonsberg in Westminster, thank you.
Conservative critics of Theresa May have pledged their support for the Prime Minister, for now at least. Last night, some Tory MPs threatened to mount a leadership challenge over her Brexit plans. But today, Mrs May said her Chequers blueprint is the only way forward. From Westminster, here's our political correspondent, Paul Brand.
Are you part of a plot to get rid of the Prime Minister, David Davis?
Once again this morning, Tory MPs were on the march. But this time, it was partly in retreat. Those in the Brexit-loving ERG club forced to deny they're plotting a coup.
The officers of the European Research Group are not involved in any kind of plot or scheme to either procure a confidence vote or win it. But it is obvious, and there is no point denying that there's a great deal of concern.
We know that privately last night, several of these MPs were making plans. But this morning, this was the only one they'd show us. A rival to Theresa May's policy on the Northern Irish border.
There's nothing new in here. It's actually quite boring when you get to read it.
Not when it's a direct challenge to Chequers. Their plan is to use technology to avoid a hard border, with trusted traders allowed to cross without being stopped and customs brokers helping companies fill out any forms online.
Do you think there's any chance of the Prime Minister changing her mind at this late stage?
Of course. I mean, look, there is a negotiation going on. And what we have argued throughout the negotiation, what the other side have argued has been unacceptable. They've come up with proposals which separate out the Northern Ireland from the rest of the United Kingdom. That's not acceptable. So we're going back and think again. They've got to think again, and I think, by the sounds of it, they're not going to accept Chequers, so we're going to have to think again. We have to reset the negotiations.
Is there time for that?
Yes.
But these MPs don't just disagree with the Prime Minister, but with each other about what to do with her.
I'm supporting the Prime Minister and have said that consistently. It's the policy that I wish to see changed.
I think she's been very dogmatic. She is sticking her heels in, and she clearly doesn't want to lose face, so she's sticking with it.
Does she need to go?
Well, I put my letter in 2 months ago. My letter's still there.
And MPs writing to demand she goes helped Jeremy Corbyn pen a few lines of his own.
The government's Brexit negotiations are an abject failure. I can see that by the sullen faces behind her. And that's not just the ERG group, it's the whole lot of them.
What we have put forward in the Chequers plan is a plan that delivers on the result of the referendum, ensures that we take control of our money, our borders and laws, but does so in a way that protects jobs.
Do you have the confidence of your party?
Tonight, she does still have enough of it to avoid being driven out of here for good. Paul Brand, ITV News, Westminster.
OK, well, let's go to our political editor, Robert Peston, who's at Westminster. Now, Robert, it looked very much like last night, like some in her party were plotting against Mrs May. So what's happened then to that coup?
Well, I did reveal last night that they are plotting against her. And, you know, what I disclosed was that at what was effectively a semi-public meeting, somewhere over 40 Tory MPs, members of the European Research Group, were going through the logistics of how to get rid of her, and very significantly, not a single person at the meeting had a good word to say for her. But there is also a recognition on their part that there's no point in triggering a leadership election if they can't win, because all that would happen then is she would be effectively unable to be challenged for another year. So what they're doing is biding their time, waiting for their moment. Now, tomorrow, the Prime Minister will give them some of what they want, which is preparations for a no-deal Brexit. They're not frightened of that. Quite a lot of their party is. The paradox for the Prime Minister is if she persuades the country that a no-deal Brexit isn't such a bad idea, they might bring forward a leadership challenge, because if that led to a hiatus, a rupture in Brexit talks, the costs, they would say, to the country wouldn't be so huge.
OK, Robert at Westminster, thank you.
So Conservative pro-Brexit MPs claim they've got a plan to unlock one of the trickiest and thorniest issues in the Brexit negotiations, avoiding a hard border between Northern Ireland and the Republic. Their idea to streamline customs checks using established technology was swiftly dismissed by Dublin as an unworkable distraction. And the policy launch was overshadowed by questions over whether the pro-Brexit Tory MPs in the European Research Group have been plotting not just to get rid of Theresa May's Brexit policy, but of Theresa May herself. Our political editor Gary Gibbon has this.
These Conservatives say they want Britain out of the customs union and the single market. And they say that doesn't mean a new border has to go up between Northern Ireland and Ireland.
This paper sets out how we can maintain a border which is as free-flowing as it is today, while still maintaining the integrity of the single market. It explains how regulatory compliance checks, customs declarations and rules of origin declarations can all be carried out away from the border.
We're arguing this on logic, facts and the needs of the European Union to protect their own market. That's why they should listen to it. That's why the Prime Minister should listen.
Ireland's Foreign Minister responded with a dismissive tweet. He said it was a reheat of ideas already shown to be unworkable. Time is short, Simon Coveney said, and we don't need distractions like this. A separate meeting of the pro-Brexit group of MPs, which happened last night in a Commons meeting room, also caught the headlines. Several Tory MPs talked about the need to depose Theresa May and to do it fast.
There's some strong views of individual backbenchers who were saying that she needs to go, and there's probably more of a movement of people are saying that in the meeting than there ever has been, actually.
It felt like an extraordinary moment, a bit of a moment when the ice plates creak.
Absolutely.
Last night's meeting was chaired by a man who only 9 weeks ago was a Brexit minister in Theresa May's government.
I should say the meeting was convened to talk about policy.
But a third of it was taken up by talk about getting rid of the Prime Minister. You were chairing it. People might scratch their heads and wonder whether that's where you are.
I feel sure those people who were at the meeting will remember very clearly my seeking to move the conversation onto other topics. But I'm not for one moment going to stand here on the news rehearsing a private meeting.
But it does sound as though people in the room thought they'd like to give it a go, but they weren't sure they had the numbers.
There is no point denying that there is very considerable anxiety amongst Conservative MPs.
There was a suggestion in the room last night, some people felt, actually, we might have the votes to get the vote of no confidence, but we couldn't be sure of winning that vote of no confidence.
Two people said that, usual suspects, but you know, I've heard completely opposite. I've heard more people coming out now saying that the Prime Minister must go.
The other point which keeps recurring after last night's meeting, I wonder if those Conservative MPs who are here would signal, maybe put your hand up if you think Theresa May should carry on as Prime Minister beyond November if she hasn't changed policy. If she hasn't changed policy and dumped Chequers.
The second question is a pointless one. We're not going to get into that sort of thing.
But while the protests and the plotting continue, in parts of Whitehall, they are now daring to think there could be a deal signed with the EU at a special summit in mid-November. There's sufficient hope in some quarters of government for them to start working on a timetable for what would happen next. There could be a couple of weeks or so of campaigning, reaching over MPs' voices to try and change opinion in the country, trying to win some Labour MPs to make up for lost dissident Tory MPs who don't want to vote for the deal. And then in the final week of November, there could be a 3 to 4 day debate on the deal, with a vote on the final day.
Merci d'applaudir, comme ça je peux boire.
Thank you for your applause. That gives me an opportunity to drink.
D'une façon générale.
They thought that might have been a self-mocking joke. The European Commission President told MEPs in Strasbourg all must avoid Britain crashing out with no deal.
We owe it to our citizens and our businesses to ensure the United Kingdom's withdrawal is orderly and that there is stability afterwards.
A lot of the talk about how there could be a deal with the EU in mid-November seems linked to the idea that there could be a rather woolly declaration about the future relationship, which glances over the unresolved complications of how Britain lives alongside the EU after Brexit. One source close to number 10 said it could nail down as little as 20% of what that future relationship really means. That won't please these Tory MPs, but could it soften some of the resistance? We could be 11 weeks from finding out.
Gary Gibbon there. Well, a short time ago, I spoke to Jacob Rees-Mogg, and I put it to him that his technological solution to the Irish border question was almost identical to one already looked at and rejected by the government.
We wanted to look at what the EU was asking for, and this was made very clear by Monsieur Barnier when he said that he wouldn't do anything that threatened the integrity of the single market. And so what we were asking ourselves was not, as the British government had done before, what would the British government like to do, but how could you solve the problems posed by the European Union using techniques that the European Union already uses. So that's the sense in which there's nothing new. There's no new technique, there's no new technology. It's using existing techniques and existing technology to meet the EU's requirement so that any reasonable person would think the Northern Ireland, Republic of Ireland border was as secure as any of the other EU borders.
But that was exactly the argument put forward within government, looked at for months and months and months, and the government couldn't sell it.
The EU has been surprisingly clear. It's basically said either you can stay in the EU, in the single market and the customs union, or you can leave and have a free trade deal. Now, as we're leaving, I think we should accept their offer of a free trade deal and recognise that to get there, we need to meet the EU's requirements to protect its single market.
But is this paper sellable? You're not going to be able to get this through the House, are you?
Well, that is a very important question. But yes, of course, I think it can be got through the House, because what you're looking at now is a Chequers proposal that nobody likes. It has, as far as one can tell, no support outside the Cabinet, pretty much. Chequers is a dying duck in a thunderstorm, if it's not quite a dead duck.
Was dutiful the most glowing praise you could find for your Prime Minister?
It is in my book, yes. It may not be in yours, but I think people who are willing to do their duty deserve to be held in the highest estimation.
She has made it clear that Chequers is the only plan. The logical conclusion has to be, if Chequers doesn't change, she has to change. You have to change your leader.
No, I don't think that follows. I think there's a leap in logic there, that the Prime Minister has changed her mind on this matter before. There's a big change but from Lancaster House to Chequers. If the Prime Minister returns to a more Lancaster House approach, were to adopt a Canada Plus style free trade agreement with this workable solution to the Northern Ireland border that meets the exam question, it respects the structures of the single market in a way that any reasonable person would think was workable. The key to Chequers was a feeling that the Irish border couldn't be solved, and I think we've come up with a solution that meets the requirements of the European Union, and that changes the whole picture. That's why this paper is so important, and there's been no fundamental challenge to what we've said in the paper about how this could be done and how it could ensure that the border between Northern Ireland and the Republic is at least as good as borders like the one between Poland and Belarus, in a way that maintains the integrity of the single market but without physical checks, because we think it can be done just as well, just as effectively, without having stops on the border.
So when people like the head of Jaguar Land Rover say that Brexit, a no deal, could cost tens of thousands of jobs in the industry, you're unmoved by that?
Well, I think it's quite interesting that the government, feeling that we had answered the Northern Ireland problem, has decided to move on to just-in-time delivery. Just-in-time delivery takes place across borders other than within the EU. It takes place, 21%, I think, of car components are imported from outside the European Union and are already part of just-in-time solutions. Just-in-time does not depend on the single market or the customs union.
So the man who runs Jaguar Land Rover is wrong, is he?
I'm not going to say that the man who runs Jaguar Land Rover is going to run his company in one way or another, but there is no consequence of Brexit that would make that necessary. That would be a consequence of Jaguar Land Rover deciding that, in spite of the fact that only, what is it, about 20% of its exports to the European Union, that is its obsession.
But he says it will cost the company £1.2 billion. It would mean the end of investment. Jobs would go. And you're saying that is a price worth paying, or you don't believe him?
I'm not saying that's a price worth paying. there isn't going to be this cost. This cost would mean that we were imposing tariffs on imports into this country for car components. Why would we want to do that? No government is going to take these self-harming acts that people who are very keen on remaining in the European Union think we would make.
But when he's talking about delays impacting the company, you're saying he's wrong.
There's absolutely no reason for delays. Goods come through Southampton in 6 seconds. You know, if there's a crash on the M25, there are longer delays than there are from customs at Southampton.
OK, Jacob Rees-Mogg, thank you very much for talking to us today.
Well, we're joined now by the Conservative Remainer, Gillian Keegan. Gillian Keegan, when we hear Mr Rees-Mogg say no government is going to take these self-harming steps, in other words, steps that cost tens of thousands of jobs, well, that sounds like throwing in the towel.
Well, first of all, I just have to take issue with the fact I'm not Gillian Keegan Remainer, and I think we should drop that tag off everybody. I'm a practical leaver. I voted to remain, but I'm perfectly happy with the decision. I'm just a practical person and experienced business person in how we implement it.
Well, that makes you even more interesting, because I can ask you the same question again as a practical Remainer. If it really becomes likely that Britain is going to lose tens of thousands of jobs, would one go ahead with Brexit?
I think that the whole point of the Chequers deal is to build in compromise to ensure that we take it's a low-risk Brexit that's basically business-friendly. It effectively tries to keep frictionless trade and keep the terms of business that all businesses have invested on the terms that they knew before the referendum, not since mostly, and it aims to keep it as it is. So if you do operate just in time, then just in time will continue without you having to build in warehousing, build in extra stock facilities, and the costs. And Jacob referred to, you know, this 1.2 billion or whatever the guy from Jaguar Land Rover had said. It won't be tariffs that he's anticipating. It will be the costs and the changes of processes to his business that he will have to build in, because the biggest cost of all to a car company is if the car production line stops working, because you're not making any cars and you've got all the cost. So they have to build in contingency to make sure that doesn't happen.
But you know, if he were here, he would simply say, this is the problem. Chequers, your ideal, is not leaving the European Union effectively.
Well, it is leaving the European Union if you prioritise the things that Chequers prioritises, which is ending free movement, taking back control of our farming and fishing policy, no longer paying after the implementation period, no longer paying the vast amounts of money. So if they're the bits of leaving that you prioritise, then it 100% delivers on that. If your version was that you had to completely break and not have any cooperation on trade in terms of the rule book, then of course it's not leaving. But I think the vast majority of the public would think if we can end free movement, keep our trade, keep our jobs, keep building on the record of 1,000 jobs a day, and you know that we've had a fabulous economic record in the last few years. We want to keep building on that, not to put it at risk by having
this appearance this morning of all these characters led by Mr Rees-Mogg, does that now represent a plan, do you think, what they laid out there? A plan? Is that the counter-Chequers plan?
I don't think there's... it deals... They've got a solution, they think, for the Northern Irish border. I mean...
Yeah, but do you think you've seen enough now to represent a viable plan that you can counter against the Chequers?
No, because it doesn't actually solve frictionless trade, actually. I mean, the reality...
But then lurking behind this, surely, is what we also saw last night, which is the gradual crumbling of discipline in your party. I mean, it's an incredible thing to have had MPs openly discussing getting rid of the Prime Minister.
I don't think it's much news that there's differences of opinion on Brexit in all parties in the House of Commons. And in fact, since the referendum, you know, there's been... I wouldn't think there's been that much discipline that's been on display, actually, in terms of people having different views. And that's to be expected. We don't have many referendums, you know, thank God, probably most people would say, but we don't have many. This one has been divisive. People have very different views. And until we get over to the other side with something that we can all get behind, then that will probably continue. What you've got at the moment...
And you're convinced we will get over to the other side, whatever that other side is?
I am convinced, because you're at this maximum signalling point now, where people are signalling, you know, to try and change something. But, you know, the reality is the negotiation is not the same as these signals.
Gillian Keegan, thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you very much.
Jackie.
So what do people who live along the Irish border feel about the post-Brexit future? Porrick O'Brien has been to talk to some businesses near the border in Newry to find out.
Benny the Goes was an old shebeen, a legendary drinking den on the border. You walked out the back door into the Republic of Ireland. You walked out the front door into the UK. A monument to heady days and hard lives on a hard border.
What we're going to be doing today is putting forward ideas to solve the difficulty on the Irish border.
A group of Brexiteer Tory MPs, including Jacob Rees-Mogg, set out their stall today for dealing with the Brexit Irish border problem. Their approach appears to be, problem, what problem? Around the corner from the shebeens, still on the border, we hastily convene a focus group session. You know who this is? Jacob Rees-Mogg. Do you know who that is?
I don't know.
Do you know who that is, first of all?
I don't know.
To what degree do you trust or not trust the Westminster politicians to deliver on that?
Wouldn't have great faith in them now, to be honest. But
why not?
Because they're not here every day to see what goes on, and they're oceans apart from us.
Especially the way that them politicians are going on over there. They're making a ham of it, you know.
You think?
Yeah, big time, yeah.
This was an unrepresentative snapshot, but the handful of people we spoke to either side of the old shebeen thought Westminster politicians generally considered them to be Brexit collateral damage. In these neighbourhoods, memories are still raw when it comes to what hard borders felt like. Neighbours have told us of stories, for example, of the police raiding this place back in the day. The Garda Síochána, the Irish police, raided from the front, the RUC raided from the back. Now these neighbourhoods are back at a crossroads when it comes to Brexit. This recycling company in Newry positioned slap bang in the middle of that crossroads/fault line. A third of the waste they process here comes from the Republic of Ireland, a third from Northern Ireland, a third from the rest of the UK. A fleet of trucks crisscrossing the border every day. The director sees the hard Brexiteer set as the pinstripe philosophers of Brexit.
People are approaching Brexit philosophically as opposed to approaching it practically. You know, or some people are. I mean, those of us who are in business and we're trying to figure out what we're going to do, the philosophical approach is not, it's like a handbrake on a rowing boat. It ain't much use to you.
The message from the people we spoke to today: time for less Brexit philosophy, time for more Brexit practicalities.
Porrick O'Brien on the Irish-Anglo border.
Well, tonight's main news: Tory Brexiteers claim they've come up with a solution to the most vexing problem in the Brexit negotiations, the future of the Irish border. They say their plan uses existing technology to simplify customs checks. The Irish government has dismissed the idea as unworkable. Now back to our political editor, Gary Gibbon in Westminster. So, Gary, a new policy on the Irish border and plotting behind the scenes. Is the government worried?
No, I wouldn't say they're panicking about this. I think some of them say they feel mildly reassured that the ERG, from their perspective, the pressure group, European Research Group, Tory Brexiteers, has moved a bit closer to the government's position. That they find slightly reassuring. On the slightly clumsy plotting that happened last night in a meeting of about 50 MPs, you've got to call that a semi-public meeting because meetings of that size always leak. They're not impressed by that, but they feel that even if those MPs got the numbers to trigger a vote of no confidence in the Prime Minister, they don't yet have the numbers to win that vote of no confidence, so they won't trigger it. I think what you'd say you feel on government circles just in the last couple of weeks is not so much optimism about Brexit, but just a tiny bit of qualified dread. They feel they can see the outline of a timetable looking ahead. Talk of possibly getting an idea of what the government's post-Brexit immigration policy might be before the conference. Talk of possibly getting a deal mid-November, then trying to roll out some publicity ahead of that, win people over in the party and in the country ahead of a vote potentially in Parliament on the deal, possibly in the last week of November. So a sense there of a timetable and dates, but not exactly how the fates will end up.
Gary Gibbon there, thank you very much.
If the arch-Brexiteers of the European Research Group spent last night plotting Theresa May's downfall, today the language accompanying their report on the Irish border was all about lending the Prime Minister a helping hand with her Brexit problem. What the ERG plan seems to amount to is making Northern Ireland a distinct food safety area, not just for live animals as it is now, but making it a common biosecurity area for all foodstuffs and making all physical checks away from the border. The CBI said the proposal was too superficial to be of any use, and Ireland's Foreign Minister said the proposals were an unworkable distraction. Downing Street slapped the ERG down, saying the Chequers blueprint was the only credible and negotiable option. So what exactly has the ERG come up with? Here's our political editor, Nick Watt.
Borders. They've scarred Europe and shaped Europe for centuries. And now the land border in Ireland is defining the nature of the UK's exit from the EU. The Chequers proposal aims to avoid a hard border in Northern Ireland by aligning the UK with the EU on goods.
Mr. Davis,
alarmed that this would tie the UK too closely to the EU, Brexiteers today outlined plans to avoid a hard border whilst maintaining greater distance from EU rules.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for coming.
The European Research Group wants to pave the way for a more straightforward free trade deal with the EU by allowing new customs declarations on existing VAT records, customs checks by mobile teams away from the border, and common agricultural regulations.
The paper here is designed to give the Prime Minister more options.
We can solve the Irish question and find facilities to have a drive-through border without any infrastructure.
The only threat to the peace process comes from the people who are suggesting this mad idea that Northern Ireland should, for purposes of trade, be treated as if it was still part of the European Union.
We can deliver a free trade agreement which is reconcilable with an open and free-flowing border in Northern Ireland.
This Chequers proposal does not fit in the European law, so it's a dead end.
So the ERG thinks it has the answers, but there are many outstanding questions.
David Davis, can I ask you, obviously the significance of this paper is that this takes you potentially to a Canada plus negotiation. But for that, you need a negotiation. And the EU has said very simply they are not going to negotiate on the basis of these sorts of ideas.
As we get to the high-pressure part of the negotiation, through Salzburg, then through October, then through November, and we're now talking about going to November, we will see, I think, a change of step. But it's down to the negotiators who are actually doing it. It's down to Dominic Raab, and it's down to Theresa May to do it. But yes, this is certainly feasible, and it makes a free trade plus arrangement very workable for Northern Ireland.
So, a bevy of former cabinet ministers and indeed a former Northern Ireland First Minister showing that Eurosceptics do have an alternative plan for Brexit, and most specifically on Northern Ireland, with an idea that would allow them to bury Chequers and establish a more traditional free trading arrangement with the European Union. The problem from then, though, was that this was overshadowed by divisions amongst Brexiteers about whether Theresa May should be dislodged. What's your role? Are you a moderating influence? You were saying keep those letters in your drawers.
I don't think there are many people who are saying that. I think there have always been a few, but there are a few spread across all wings of the party. There always are. No leader of any party. Even Jesus had disciples who were disgruntled with him, Iscariot being the most prominent. That you know how it is. That's always been the way, regardless of the qualities of the leader.
So no threat to Theresa May from the ERG for now. For once, it was Theresa May's supporters who were grinning today. I was accosted by one of her closest cabinet allies who told me the Brexiteers' plan for Northern Ireland simply is undeliverable because the EU will not negotiate on that basis. And then he added, we also learnt today that the Brexiteers do not have the numbers at the moment to unseat the Prime Minister.
This is a Prime Minister that had the biggest hospital pass in history in terms of the outcome of the referendum and having to deal with the situation that she is in a hung parliament that the country has voted for. And for colleagues to talk about causing a confidence vote in her, it, to my mind, is ridiculous. It's against the national interest. We need to stick with the Prime Minister. She is out there fighting on our behalf to negotiate a good deal with Europe, and we need to make sure that she can deliver it.
For the moment, Theresa May thinks she holds the home advantage. But when she travels to an EU gathering next week, she will face the challenge of an away game.
Nick Watt, well, Brexit supporter Owen Paterson was at the launch today and he backs this plan for the Northern Ireland border. He is a former Northern Ireland Secretary. Good evening to you, Owen Paterson. Owen, the trouble is that the ERG has come up with a plan the EU's already rejected.
But we're stuck. At the moment, the whole narrative is that to protect the integrity of the customs union and the single market, the only way to do that is to have, quote, a hard border, which means infrastructure on the border. Now, the Republic of Ireland government doesn't want it, the UK government doesn't want it, the European Union doesn't want it, but we're completely stuck on this nonsense narrative. So what we looked at, we just looked at the facts, we talked to experts, we looked at the rules, and we've come up with a paper which shows very clearly that using existing techniques and arrangements and methods, we can adhere to the existing rules and we will not be prejudicing the integrity of the single market and the customs union.
But the problem was that this is exactly what Theresa May's government came up with, and it was rejected, which was doing away with checks at the border, respecting each other's rules, using tech. It was a no, no, no from the European Union. My point is, you haven't come up with anything new. You're just rehashing what was already rejected.
Yeah, we come up with a practical proposition which works. All these.
But the EU's already rejected this.
But we're stuck. We're trying to be helpful to the EU. We all know what the EU would ideally like. They would ideally like to have had no referendum, no Brexit. They would like us to stay in the customs union, stay in the single market. We all know that. That would be their ideal. But we've got to help them get off. They've got themselves on a hook.
Okay, well, let's just
which could go very badly wrong for them.
Well, let's just go through a couple of them. Trusted trader. Trusted traders, going to be no checks for trusted traders. What is a trusted trader?
Trusted traders are authorised economic operators. Germany has 6,000. We have, the last count I saw, 608. So just hang on, how it goes. I'll just explain very simply. A lot of the trade south of the border is repetitive. It's the same products from the same sources to the same destinations. So you take milk, there are very regular shipments of milk from the same cows, same farm, same tanker, same road, same destination. That is absolutely tailor-made for the concept of a trusted trader.
But at the point at which you say that there will be maybe a random check of a trusted trader, then you have got a border check in all but physical border, and that is what's unacceptable.
No, Kirsty, no. That's incredibly important. There will be no check on the border itself. There's a border now. There's a VAT border, a tax border, there's a currency border, there's a duty border, and very importantly, there's a security border. There's no physical infrastructure. There is smuggling going on, sadly, probably as we speak this evening.
Yeah.
And it's a problem in the Republic and it's a problem in the North. Neither the government in Dublin nor the government in Westminster, nobody says the answer to smuggling today is more physical infrastructure on the border.
But
nobody's calling for that.
It's not about the border, it's about where you say the border. Now look, what you're saying is that actually there might be a check 20 kilometres from the border. It's still a check, it's still a border of sorts. And the Chief Constable of the PSNI, very much who you, obviously, as a former Northern Ireland Secretary, this will not work, this will add to problems.
You do pre-clearance, it happens the whole time.
But you're actually going to be doing some spot checks, as I understand it. It's not a question of everybody goes everywhere with absolutely no check whatsoever.
That happens now.
As soon as you have customs officers roving about in vans in Northern Ireland, given the volatility of the situation, and when you know what the Chief Constable thinks, you know that that's unworkable and unwise.
Well, in which case you stop all trade. I mean, that's a complete counsel of despair. What you're talking about is pre-clearance. You're talking about very respectable suppliers dealing with world-class companies on both sides of the border. You take Guinness. There are 13,000 border crossings for Guinness.
But they're not
That
always
is a
going to be
vast
Guinness. 608, but you might have a small trader who's not a cleared trader.
Yeah.
Then he's going to have or she's going to have a check somewhere. It won't necessarily be on where the borderline is, but what there'll be is spot check somewhere else, and as far as the EU is concerned, that's unacceptable.
Well, that's a nonsense. It's happening now. There are spot checks.
But there will be infrastructure. It qualifies as infrastructure, which means that it is the end of the idea of no border restrictions whatsoever. There's no back.
No, if you're saying that, that is ludicrous. You're saying that there will be no trade.
No, what I'm saying is what the EU is saying is that to be absolutely no evidence of any infrastructure, either tech infrastructure or physical infrastructure or border patrols of any description.
No, they're talking about, as I understand it, when they talk about harder border, they mean more installations on the border, which everybody knows won't work, because it didn't work when we had 27,000 armed personnel, and it won't work in the future. What we're talking about is going to the direction which the WTO wants to go in, which the European Union, led by Lars Carlson, is in his papers suggesting that you have pre-clearance. So, I mean, are you really saying that you have a shipment from 50, 60 miles deep into Northern Ireland, that's pre-cleared, that is going to be a massive security threat? I just don't think it is. Are you saying that when a vet goes on a farm 20 miles, 30 miles from the border, which happens on a regular basis, checking cattle health, and we know the livestock are very carefully regulated, is that an extraordinary security? But it's a complete nonsense. What we're saying is there are quality goods in the north, there are quality goods in the south, and they're pre-checked.
But we already know that Theresa May won't wear this. She thinks it's a distraction. We already know our Northern Ireland Foreign Minister says it was a reheat of ideas already proved to be unworkable. Is this it? Well, is this the challenge to Theresa May's checkers? Is this the extent of it when we know that people for years have been looking for details? This is it? This is all you have to offer?
So this, I said at the time, is boring, because this is what works around the world. The real shock today, from the government's point of view, is that you have a man with 35 years in customs clearance in Holland saying he is shocked that Chequers has no plan for VAT. Now that is a complete showstopper.
Thank you very much, Owen Paterson.